Now that you're familiar with adding labels to your apps and then manipulating those to look a certain way, let's see how we can work with a few other interface elements. We'll start with looking at text fields. So if you click down here in your object library and start typing text, you can see the top option there is text field. So let's drag that in and I'll align it centrally somewhere at the top. So if you've used an iPhone or iPad before, you'll be very familiar with these. They're just a standard field for entering text. Now, as we make that wider and narrower, notice that it actually allows us to align it to the edge of the label if we want. So that can be really useful if you've got more than one thing on a page and you want them all to be aligned to each other. But I'm going to use the layout guides at the edge of the screen. So we've got a kind of full width, but with a bit of padding around the edge. So now we've got our text field in there. Let's just have a quick look and see how it behaves. The nice thing is we don't actually need to do any work on this for it to function as a text field. So if we tap inside, then we get the keyboard up that we're used to, and we can start typing something in there. You can also use your computer keyboard on the simulator as well. So that's really handy to allow you to type things in nice and quickly. So we don't need any programming at all to get the text field actually working with the keyboard. So that's a good start. Let's have a quick look and see what options we can choose for our text field. I'm not going to mess around with color and font and things like that. You can do that yourself if you want to. But a few useful features. So placeholder text might be something like your email address. And then that just gives a little bit of text that tells the user what they should be putting into that box. And that text will disappear as soon as the user starts typing in the box. Now, one thing I'd like to draw your attention to while we're typing in text fields is under hardware, when you're running the simulator, you can choose to use the software keyboard or the hardware keyboard. And I would choose one of those. So if we say software keyboard, then when we tap in there, the software keyboard pops up and we can use that. And you can see that the placeholder disappears as well, but it reappears if they clear everything out of that text field. So the placeholder is really handy. We can have a background image, we can disable the background image if we want to, and a load of other stuff. The things that I particularly want to draw your attention to are the types here. So you can change the capitalization if you want. So if you were entering a name, for example, you might want to capitalize each word. You can turn off auto correction if it's an email address or a name or something like that, and you can turn off spell checking as well. The particularly useful one that I find is the keyboard type. So if, for example, you want the user to enter a number, then you can choose number pad, and then when we run that, then the keyboard that will appear will be a number keyboard. So let's have a look. If we tap in there, you can see we've now got numbers. Fantastic. So that's really handy as well. You'll notice that for the first time we've had some messages here. I wouldn't worry about those. They may well not have popped up on your version of Xcode, but if they do, you can just ignore them. And in fact, we can make them disappear if we want to as well. And then we've got a few more options down there, our familiar alpha background, etc. But that's all I'm going to look at for now for text fields. So they're obviously extremely useful. The next thing we'll look at is buttons. Again, very useful indeed. So the new style for iOS buttons is for them to be just text. They don't really look like buttons, but that's what users are used to seeing. So I would use the default iOS look unless you particularly want to do it a different way, because that's what the user is used to seeing and they will see that as a button. So same as before, we can double click and change the text, and we can change the style in very much the same way that we changed the label styles as well. The only thing that I want to show you that's different here is this state config. So we've got different states for our buttons. So the default is when it's just being a plain button. The highlighted is when it's actually been tapped. So you could change the text color for when it's been tapped. So the default there is white, but you could change that to something else. And you've got selected and disabled, which we're not so worried about here. And you can also have an image as a button instead, or an image and some text if you want. So let's just have a quick look and see how that button behaves. Again, if you're used to iOS, you'll know how the buttons look. But if I tap that, you can see it responds nice and quickly. So again, I don't need to write any code to make the button actually appear to work, but of course it doesn't do anything until we type some code. So that's buttons. The final interface element type I want to show you in this video is images. So to do that, we'll need to get an image. So I'm going to jump over to Chrome and just go into Google Images. And later on in this chapter, we're going to need an image of a cat. So I'm going to find a nice image of a cat, and I'll go for a cartoony one. Here we go. I think I'll go for that first one. That looks good to me. Notice though that it's a very, very big image. 4,000 pixels is a lot of pixels, so that's going to be pretty big. So we're going to need to resize that before we bring it into our app. So I'm just going to control click on there and click Save Image As. And I'm just going to put it right there on the desktop, and I'll call it cat. So there we go. It's now saved on the desktop, but we're going to need to resize it before we put that into our app because that's many more pixels than we need. So I'm just going to click cat.png there, and that will bring up the cat in preview, which is the Mac image viewer. And fortunately, right here, we can change the number of pixels. So if we click Tools and then Adjust Size, I can then choose how many pixels I want. So I'm going to change it to a width of 500, which will make it a much more reasonable file size. There we go. And then File, Save. So now I've got my cat image. It's worth saying a quick note about copyright here. If I was using this image in a live app that was going to go out, I would of course have to establish whether or not the image is copyrighted and whether I had the right to use that. But we're not doing that here, so I'm not particularly worried. So how do we actually bring that image into our app? Well, it's nice and straightforward, you'll be glad to hear. All we need to do is go over to the Finder, which is this little smiley face here, which is like the Windows Explorer of Mac. Essentially, it allows you to access all your files, and then find where you saved the cat image. So I saved it on the desktop, so there it is. And then all you need to do is drag it in. So I'm just going to drag it over here, right into the app. And then you get a few options. I would leave those as the default, so copy the item in, so copy the actual file into your app, and then create groups. So there we go. Our cat is right there. So if we want to drag it into our app, you might be able to guess. We type in image here, and then we've got an image view. So remember, a view is just anything that appears on the screen. So an image view is just an image, really. And then I'm going to drag it in. I'll make it nice and centered there. So there it is. So now I've got my image. I want to make sure my cat image appears on this image view. So if I've got it selected in the context menu here, you can see we've got a drop down for image at the top, and I just select cat.png. There it is. So wonderful. As usual, I'll just bring your attention to a few of the main features of images that you'll want to be aware of. The main one is the mode here. So we've got scale to fill. So that means if we resize our box, it will stretch the image to fit the whole of the box, which obviously doesn't look great for that particular image. It's stretching it out much too wide. So maybe we can find a different mode that fits that better. Aspect fit is probably the one you're going to want most often, and that retains the original aspect, so it doesn't stretch it out, but it makes it as tall or as wide as it can, as long as it's displayed in the original aspect ratio. So that's probably the mode you're going to want most often. We've got aspect fill, which keeps it in the ratio but stretches it out so that you can't necessarily see the whole thing. Not quite so useful. And then there's a bunch of other options which are mostly about alignment, so align it to the top, etc. You can play around with those if you like, but the one that we'll probably spend most of our time using is aspect fit. So there we go. We've got things like tags, which we'll see later on, but we won't be using those now. And we've got our familiar alpha, background, etc. and some other bits and bobs, which we're not going to worry about for now. Okay, so that's it. We've added the ability of the user to add some text to the app. We've added a button, and we've added an image now to our app as well. Fabulous. So now I want you to put all this together in a little mini challenge. I want you to start from scratch, so get rid of all of these, and then create the layout for just a little app which asks the user how old they are. So I want some kind of image, maybe an image of a person or something like that, and then a label that says how old are you, a text field for the user to put their answer in, and then a button to say submit or continue or something like that. And feel free to go crazy on the design. So if you're interested in design, you can play around with fonts and colors and layouts and everything. If not, just use all the defaults and that's fine as well. So just a quick label saying how old are you, a text field for them to put their answer into, and a button to say continue or submit, and then some kind of image to keep it all together. Go for it. Good luck. All right. Hope that went well. I'm going to add all of those in order. So I'll start with our label, and I'm going to center align everything. So how old are you? There we go. I'm not going to particularly worry about style, but I do want to keep everything centered and nicely laid out. So that will do for my label. For my text field, I'm going to align it to the left and have a nice full width there. And because I'm asking them how old they are, I only want a number in response. So bonus points if you thought of doing this. I'm going to change the keyboard type to the number pad. And that will just make my app a little bit more user-friendly because they won't have to switch the keyboard to the number keyboard. And then we want a button to submit their age. And finally, we need an image. So I'm going to go back to Google Images. And because we're asking something about people, I would just want to find a picture of a happy person. We'll find a nice, happy clip art image. Oh, why not? That bunch of happy people there. Looks great. Okay, so again, save image as, and I'm going to save it right there on the desktop. And I'll just rename it to something really simple called people. Now that's a GIF file, a GIF, but that's okay. We can drag those in as well. Xcode supports that type of file. So switch to the Finder, and there's my people image. There it is. Again, pick all the default options, and now it's in there. So now I can create my image view just by typing image, and let's in fact make it as big as we can. Something like that. And then let's just select people for my image there. And as before, we'll change it to aspect fit, and we might be able to even make it a bit bigger. Great. Let's just run that and make sure it looks good on our simulator. Wonderful. So a really nice looking, simple app interface. And then when we tap there, we can put in our numbers, and the submit button does respond, but of course it doesn't do anything. Now, It's all well and good making these apps that look nice but don't do anything, but of course, to be able to actually get the app to do something for the user, we need to write some code. That's where things get really exciting, and we're going to do that in the next video. See you there.